Thank you, Mr. King. Right, come over here. So first off, a little bit about you, Mr. King. Not that you haven't heard this, but you spent your life amplifying the work of your father. You're known as, Patty mentioned, global humanitarian. The work you do, making sure the Black community has a voice, making sure that they understand that each of their individual contributions matter. You've been featured on major news stations, TV stations. All this being said, just, it's an honor to have you here and help us with this amazing cause. We believe that the work you've done, making each person know that their individual actions and voice matter, is what we need. We need a village to improve healthcare. It's not just about this company, it's about all of our industry, our doctors, our payers, our providers, our humanitarians, our civil rights advocates, working together to improve their lives. So I'm gonna start by just saying something that's probably gonna crack you up. When I started this work, I used to quote your father, and the quote that I said about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a quote he had, I believe when he was starting one of the medical societies in, I think, '66, and he said, of all the forms of inequality, the injustices in healthcare are the most inhumane. And literally, I still get chills when I say it, because until you're someone who needs care or someone you love needs care and can't get it, you don't understand what those words mean. So now, my question to you is, I love my dad and all, but people all over the world aren't quoting my dad. So what is it like to have strangers, people like me, just quoting your father and sort of like living with that? What is that like for you?
Well, first of all, let me say how honored I am to be here today at UCB with each of you, and to commend you as an institution and organization and all who are engaged in this work. This is a monumental task. On the one hand, it's exciting, but on the other hand, it is sad that we live in a nation that is the wealthiest nation on this planet, and yet we've not resolved, probably, as my father would have said, one of the most important issues for our survival, which is health, human health. And again, I have to start off again by commending you for what you and the organizations that you work with and the providers, everyone, because this is really, as you stated, it is not for one population. It is for all of us, and then children yet unborn, for future generations. On your specific question, it is certainly an honor that I have shared with my, of course, mom when she was physically with us, and my siblings, two who are no longer with us. There are only two of us left now in the family of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. That is, of course, we have a daughter. My wife and I, Andrea, we have the only grandchild of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. But my sister and I, Bernice Albertine King, are the only two family members left. But it is an honor that people have embraced and engaged the words of Dad that certainly are shared around our nation and world. And in a real sense, hopefully it is a reminder that the work is not done. Dad delivered his perhaps most famous message in 1963 on August 28th. The speech we all know entitled, "I Have a Dream," where he shared his message for our nation and the world. And of course, that message has been heard all over the world. And so again, it hopefully reminds us that the work still must be done. And there will be a time. Certainly elements of that dream have become true, but we as a society and a world still have a long way to go.
Thank you. With that being said, was there ever a time, I mean, it feels like that is a lot to be growing up with the legacy of your father. Was there ever a time where you said, maybe I'm not going to follow this path, which sort of seemed almost predetermined for you to follow his legacy?
Well, certainly, I think of a couple answers when you ask it in that way. I guess when I was a kid, like many kids, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, it was a fireman, a policeman, a bus driver, a truck driver, an airline pilot, just about everything you can think of, the whole gamut. Probably at 10 years old, when my father was killed on April 4th of 1968, when I thought I was dreaming, that day that it happened, it was on a Thursday. I remember as if it were yesterday. And I was hoping that it was a dream, just a very bad dream, ultimately to awaken and realize this is reality. But it was interesting to see the assemblage of people who came from around the nation and the world, as well as people from the community who came to our home, some, but yet a cadre of friends and supporters coming to mourn with us, because when any of us go through a tragedy, the loss of anyone in our lives, but certainly a parent, for me as a child, that was the most trauma that I had ever experienced, not knowing what was going to happen tomorrow. And my mother set such a powerful example on one level. And what I mean by that is I don't ever remember her physically mourning. I didn't see her cry, at least not much. And as a child, you try to emulate what you see. So you might need to cry, but you don't. It's what you do when you're in a public setting. You're on public display. And so I'm thinking back to whether there's no good way to go through death. There's a way to make it as best as one can. And certainly my mother did that, but what she was involved in, Dad was killed April 4th, a Thursday. April 8th, he was to have led a demonstration. She went to Memphis and took the 3 older ones of us with her. We accompanied her, and she led that march. On April 9th, Dad was funeralized, and his eulogy took place. So when you think about that, no one had been captured for the murder, and yet that to me shows the level of commitment that she had to what Dad was doing. So it wasn't as if she arrived on April 4th and decided. There had always been a commitment to this work. In fact, you didn't ask me this, but when they first met in Boston, Dad was at Boston University working on his PhD. Mom was at the Boston Conservatory of Music and working on her degree in music masters. And they met in a park. They met about 6 hours. There's a little humor to this story, and I apologize for deviating, but it's a good story.
Love it. Give it to us.
So when she saw Dad, he was dressed very nicely. She appreciated that. But she noticed that her first comments were, he was such a little man. Dad was like 5'6.5", 5'7" on a good day. And so, Mom expected to marry this tall, debonair. He was handsome and all that, but he wasn't a tall guy. They talked for 6 hours. She said the longer they conversed, the taller he began to emerge. So it was a depth of conversation. Mom had read a lot of the books that he had read. Mom had actually been involved in peace demonstrations. He would say that she actually was engaged in peaceful demonstrations before me. And so he would say she brought him to that movement. Later on, obviously, Dad was leading all of these demonstrations. But it talks about the depth of how much she was engaged from day one. And so it shouldn't have been a surprise. This is all as you think about it. Now, as a kid, obviously I didn't know all of this, but I've had, 55, 56 years now to think about it. And I put all of that together in terms of the fact that Mom was leading along with Dad, and he would consult her on much of what he did. Yeah.
Well, you answered the next 6 questions, but so just feeding off, and we're going to get back on course, but feeding off what you just said, I think for a lot of us, your father was a symbol of peace. And through the strength of your family, your mother, as you said, the strength and forgiveness and peace that she showed by being able to go out and continue to do his work, and in a positive way. In times like now, when we can take an approach where we can be maybe not so peaceful, when you speak to the next generation, what do you talk to them about forgiveness? What might you say to them about forgiveness and peace?
Well, I use this one example. Part of this part of this you may or may not know. My father was killed in April of 1968. I was 10 years old. My uncle mysteriously drowned at 11. My grandmother, this you may not know, was also gunned down in church while praying the Lord's Prayer. So my father's mother was assassinated as well. Now, I had been taught as a child by my mom and dad and their examples about the power of forgiveness. And I heard my grandfather, after his wife was killed, preach many times about forgiveness and love. It's probably easier to do that as a pastor without the experience of having a wife and a son gunned down. It's a different discussion when you physically have that. So if someone intellectually had come to me and said, look, I want to love, but these people killed my loved one. I have this, not just pain. I would understand that position and wouldn't hold that against them. Well, my grandfather went down to visit the man who was in jail for killing his wife, and he asked him, son, why did you kill my lovely wife? And the man looked up at him and he said, when I get out of here, I'm going to come back and kill you. And my grandfather said to him, he said, son, I'm going to pray for you because I know prayer changes things. Beyond that, he talked about in his sermons, I refuse to allow any man, he said, to reduce me to hatred. The man that killed my lovely wife, nor the man that killed my son. I love everybody. I'm every man's brother. That was 1974. And from then on, he preached it all his life as a pastor. But when you experience that personally, it has to be transformative. So my point is, I hope that whenever I share with young people, that I'm exhibiting energy that's positive and not negative. I could easily, a black man killed my grandmother, a white man killed my father. I could hate all of y'all. But I'm thankful for the example and the spirit of love. And that's what I always hope. That's part of my message that I'm sharing with young people. We have to learn how to forgive. We have to learn how to rebuild relationships. Today specifically, it's important because we live in a society politically that is not civil, or is as civil as it once was. It's only temporarily, by the way, missing. It's our job to bring that civility back. It doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything. We don't have to. But we do have to do our disagreeing in a civil, respectful manner. We can do that. How do I know? Because we've done it in the past. We've just deviated in the last few years in a direction. Now, what I would add is that if we as humankind do not allow and engage and help the pendulum to come back around, what we're headed in is an unsustainable direction. It is not sustainable. You can blow a gasket easily. It's so much better to smile than to frown. It takes far more muscles. All of us know, all of you as health practitioners know this. But we have to exhibit it. And we have to exhibit it for our children and children yet unborn. We are so much better as a nation than the behavior we're exhibiting right now. And good, bad, or indifferent, the world is looking to us for leadership. Now, I say good, bad, or indifferent. I think it's good, but I think right now we're not providing the best leadership we can. And the best leadership is not progressive or conservative. It is just leadership that navigates through all of these issues in a constructive and not a destructive way.
That was awesome. And that wasn't even on the list. Okay, so one of the reasons I asked you that is we talk about collaborating, and I think part of what we need to do to collaborate is respect one another, understand one another, increase our empathy and understanding what it's like to be in each other's shoes. And I think with that being said, we can come together and work together and accomplish more. So this is kind of a more fun one. So what was your dad like, not from his political stance or that kind of thing, but just as a father? Like, was he strict? Was he goofy? What was he like?
I don't think I'd characterize him as goofy. I would say he was humorous.
Okay.
And people don't necessarily know that. If I had time, I would share a story. I don't know if...
Later.
Okay. That's fair. But he was, I remember times when he would come home. He often traveled. It was not a large quantity of time, but the quality was remarkable. So he would go out of town early that morning and oftentimes come back late that evening. And when he came home, sometimes coming up our stairs, the home, for anybody who knows Atlanta, it's down near the Dome. It is now being preserved by the Park Service, so at some point our home will be made available so the public can come and visit the last home that we lived there until 2004. And so, but it's being restored now. Dad, of course, was killed. We moved in '65. He was killed in '68. But when he was coming up the stairs, you could see the exhaust in his face, his cadence, the way that he carried himself. As soon as he saw us, Daddy's home, Daddy's home, all of a sudden that energy that looked as if he was pulling 100-pound weights went away, because he was totally focused on giving his children what they needed. And we would play, often. Some of us were very young then, so I put my sister on the refrigerator and she'd jump off in his arms. My mom would be frantic, of course. But nothing ever happened. It was always fun. And then there was a place, Sugar Spots, where each of us had a spot on his cheek where we kissed. And so, Bernice she'd ask, where's mommy's spot? Of course, here. And then, Yolanda's was somewhere, and mine and Dexter's. And, it was fun. We used to go to the YMCA with him and swim. Every week he would at least once or twice go to the YMCA. And then, of course, maybe 10 times, I had the opportunity to travel with him, and maybe my brother 8 times. So those are the things that stick out most, riding bicycles. In fact, I-75, I-85, just to give you context, there was a time in the early 60s when it did not exist. We would ride our bicycles from near the Carter Center where we lived all the way to Grady Hospital, just for context of those of you who know Atlanta. Fun.
I could barely ride a bike. That's a different story. But so thank you for that. I was going to ask you about fun moments, but that certainly seems like a lot of fun moments. So when we first met that first time, I kept thinking about like the community that your father built, and what he called the beloved community, and the work that he did. So when we talk about the work that you're doing today, is there anything that comes to mind that's maybe your biggest priority?
There is. There are many big priorities. I want to characterize it this way and then talk about a project that I would invite the community to be a part of. Dad used to talk about the eradication of the triple evils, and he defined them as the evil of poverty, the evil of racism, and the evil of violence. I believe that when we get to the point that we have dramatically addressed those issues, we will create a phenomenal nation. But we, for whatever reason, thus far have not. Now, one of the projects that I'm working on is called Realize the Dream. And it's an initiative that's 4.5 years away now. 2029 is my father's 100th birthday. And we are working with a number of organizations and institutions and schools to create 100 million hours of service by 2029 for Dad's 100th birthday. What the objective and the genesis of this project was as we were drifting away from each other as a society, more and more, going into our own silos, we wanted to create a concept that would bring us together. There's nothing more powerful than people deciding, hey, I want to work on this issue or that issue, and I want to help, an hour of service. It translates 100 million hours to about $3 million in revenue for 100 million hours of service. And when we get, it really is hopefully going to be a movement, because it's just the beginning. It won't be the end of people working with each other. Like, for example, it's not about your political affiliation. It's not about your religious affiliation. It's not about your gender. It's about doing something that's bigger than yourself, that we all are focusing on. There's many different issues, so we're not saying, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that. It's what speaks to you in your heart, in your family, and your community to make it better for those currently and yet unborn.
So let's hope that movement gets moving. In the work we do in healthcare, it's important that we all realize everyone has that role. So I think it also inspires this notion of we all play a part. Mm-hmm. When we think about like shared decisions between caregivers, patients, doctors, they each play a role and they're each accountable. And I think inspiring sort of that culture of accountability, the culture of each individual contribution matters, is wonderful. So when, obviously when we first talked about this event, we talked about being about healthcare. And of course, health is human right. Healthcare is important to everybody. But we talked about you getting a little bit more involved in health equity. Was that, was there a moment or something that happened where you're like, I want to also focus my energies, this legacy, on health equity or healthcare?
There probably was, or there were probably a number of moments. One of the things I kind of say is I'm very concerned about children and seniors. And my first real exposure to a lot of just health challenges, and our society has got to do so much better. But when my grandparents, my mother's parents, became ill, just looking at how much she invested, you're supposed to do that, but it was a huge investment. First of all, I'd seen my mom busy her entire existence. I mean, I used to, sometimes she'd be on the phone for hours, and we'd be at home on the address I gave you, Sunset, which is over by the Dome, and I'd want to talk about something insignificant. If it was significant, she'd stop immediately. But it was insignificant, so I'd sit and just wait until the right time so I can get her engagement. And my point is, seeing her involved in her work, sometimes it was at the King Center, where she ran that organization. She and a team built the organization. And she traveled, of course, around the nation and world. And so, in my mind, she was always busy. There are a couple of times where I saw a shift. One was when I was in college, I had to have an appendectomy. And I was in hospital for 2 weeks instead of in and out. I mean, the outpatient surgery. And then I had to have a second operation later on, adhesions. And every day, my mom would find ways to spend hours with me, although she was there. And this was way back that would have been in the late 70s, early 80s. And the next time that I saw her, not disengaged, because she was still doing her work, but focused totally on helping her parents. So she did that for me. Then I saw her do something like that for my sister. And I'm saying, oh, this is amazing. Of course, I hope I say this in the right way. Women can do far more things than we can. We're limited. Men, we can do stuff, but we kind of have to focus on one thing. Women can do like 10 things. I mean, it's amazing. My wife, gosh, I don't know how you all do it, but it's amazing. Anyway, so to see my mom focus totally on health care for her parents as they got older and older, and it was really a huge amount of, I mean, again, this is what we should do. But the reality is, if you think about it, if our system, maybe we're all human beings, everything is different. But I'm trying to figure out, how do we get to a point where our health care at the end of life or near the end of life is as good as well, how we help people to move to another level. And we just seem to not pay attention to our older people. And we throw them in facilities. Most of them, the hope is that their intentions are good. But, I used to see people at facilities and they just weren't taken care of well. Part of it was there was not enough staff. I mean, it's a combination of issues. But we can do better, and we must do better. And so that's when I saw my mom and what she did, the health care that she provided for her mother and her father. They lived to be 90s, and they're one 94, the other one almost 100. And yet, they were not, they had Alzheimer's or dementia and things, so that's really obviously a very difficult issue for any of us if we have to go through that. But that's what made me say, okay, we got to do something in healthcare. Is there a way to make this better or make one's quality instead of diminished? How do you all know what I'm saying. Anyway. Okay.
Thank you. I love that. So we're going to also talk, you're going to be on another panel with us. We have you all day. So you're going to be on another panel where we're going to talk more about, specific projects you're working on and around how to get through the communities, build trust, et cetera. So we'll talk more about that. But, when your openness has been amazing throughout this conversation. I think when we begin to work with these healthcare providers, health systems, our payers, all of these people, I think we have to be open about what we're doing, but that's right now, and maybe where we need to course correct. So when you think about partnering with communities and the things that you've learned, is there any areas where you think maybe we could course correct?
Well, I think the short answer is yes, but in a more direct way. I think there are trusted messengers that we have to identify in every community, because there's no one person who can do that other than some of our high-profile athletes and entertainers, which we should certainly engage them more. But it's really finding a trusted provider. And then I was, for example, in Austin maybe a year and a half ago, and there's a community facility that centralizes, and this is largely for an underserved population, which is a large African American, a large Hispanic Latino, and a large poor white population. And all of, like for example, when healthcare services are all over town, how do you, and you ride a bus, public transportation, it's just difficult. But everything is like centrally located in one facility, and it goes the gamut. It deals with mental health. I was just impressed. I was like, I wonder do we have something like this in Atlanta? And maybe we do. I just am not aware. But I'm like, this is something that needs to be duplicated. This is just one example. But for me, again, the biggest thing is to have a trusted voice that people will listen to. We as men don't like to go to the doctor, so I don't know who does. I don't know what it is. My brother in January passed of prostate cancer, and he had been battling with it for a number of years. And I didn't realize how severe it was, because he attempted to be a vegan, but he didn't eat much meat, at least not traditional meat, and yet, you always think, okay, if you're vegan, if you're this, it's so many dynamics and factors that can cause certain health challenges, but yet, with some screening, advanced screening, or some other types of modalities and technologies used, you're always wondering, could something have been done? And obviously, as a society, we're making more and more progress. I thought that we had, as a society, because I remember 20 years ago, it was very, very difficult. There were significant numbers, but I thought we'd reduced it, and I never would have thought that my brother would be going through that. So it's just, there's a lot of work to do.
Well, so thank you so much. I'd love to take a moment to sort of reflect on how far we've come. And it's with the message of service, the message of peace, the message of each of our individual contributions matter, that we've come so far for different inequities across the board. But there's still so far to go. And I think together we can get there. In our next, presentation lecture, and our next talk that we're going to have, we're actually going to talk a little bit about what you said about creating that environment where it's easy to get, maybe even not easy is the right word, just accessible to get to the different doctors you need, to get the resources you need. We're trying to make that happen, and we're going to actually feature some work we're doing with Morehouse School of Medicine. But I thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to your next session where we're actually going to talk a little bit more about the initiatives that you're doing, and again, a little bit more also about how to build trust with the Black communities and other underserved communities. So before we get up, I'm just going to let you know that we're going to be bringing up Dr. Raquel Quarles and Daniel Lloyd, a data scientist from UCB, and we're going to have them come to the stage as I walk you off. Thank you.
Yes,
Yes, you put that there.